Dr. Dean Kashiwagi.
I recognize many old friends. It puts more pressure on me because I want to teach you something new. And I just gave something this morning for engineers. How many of you are engineers? Okay, very good. So I won't do my engineer thing. I'm just kidding. Okay, I have about 30 minutes. Where does the best value start?
Yeah.
Okay. Best value started with my wife. She doesn't believe I say this every time. She thinks I only say it when she's here. But it actually started with my wife. So I was an engineer. My wife came out of the science, the arts and sciences, and we got married. And immediately she got pregnant, got very sick. So I was an engineer, working 40 hours a week, doing a lot of charity work, going to school full time, and I have a wife, and she's flat on her back in bed. I had never seen a wife of mine pregnant before. She was my first wife. So I'm trying to figure out how to encourage her to move off her bed. Well, some of you may have easy pregnancies, but my wife had very difficult pregnancies. So she's about 95 pounds, and in the first month and a half, she loses 25 pounds. In fact, when a doctor saw her, he thought she was so ill that he wanted to put her in the hospital. But I had never seen this before. So I was an engineer with a lack of information. And so I'm thinking in my head, I mean, how am I going to encourage my wife now to follow along with me and to somehow I can get her off the bed and get her moving? And I thought, she'll feel better. So I went into my engineering background, into engineering management, and I said, we're going to have like a partnering meeting. Okay, I'm going to work with her. Have you ever heard the words, we're going to work together? Yeah, I'm going to work with her. So I get her up one evening when she was, in her best mood. And I say, honey, we're going to have a partnering meeting, a continuous improvement meeting. And she said, okay. So I said, I have 2 sheets of paper. And this one's for you, and this one's for me. And what I want you to do is list all your expectations and goals and how you can measure them. And I'm going to do the same thing with my sheet of paper. And we're going to put the 2 together. And every week we're going to have like a inspection meeting. And we're going to check how we're doing. She taught me right away the most valuable lesson I've ever learned in life. And that is the power of non-participation. She didn't say anything. In fact, she didn't talk to me for a couple weeks. So I realized something was wrong. Right? I didn't realize how wrong my thinking was. But then she taught me another thing, because after a couple weeks, she started talking to me again. And then I said, wow, she seems like she's in a better mood. So I'm going to try this again. Honey, let's have this partnering meeting. You write down your goals and how we're going to measure it, and I'll do mine. And then she taught me really the foundation concept of best value. She said, honey, if you try to influence, impact, or control me in any way, your stress level is going to go up. Your cost is going to go up. And your production is going to go down. And that is the foundation of best value. There is no possible way for one person to control, impact, or influence another person. There's another gentleman here who we chatted, we gave a presentation this morning, and he said, you know, now that I think about it, I have a son, and I told him time after time, don't speed on your bike. Right? Don't speed on your bike. And yet, he said, my son, takes off. He crashes, needs 6 stitches on his chin. Father got upset. I told you not to speed on your bike. So his solution is get him a bigger bike. One that he has more control over, right? And guess what his son does? Still speeds on his bike. What I'm trying to propose to everyone is, my wife taught me a natural law. You have no influence, impact, or control over any other person or any other entity. So let me take it even further, because as she was teaching me, we had kids. And amazingly, they taught me a better lesson, and they took me to the next level. Because I didn't realize this, but my wife and I and my kids were in silos. And the reason I figured this out is, whenever I talked, they stopped listening. Finally, I grabbed one of my kids and said, why don't you listen to me? And they told me, because your experience came from a different age. We're in a totally different age. Dad, you have no idea what's going on in our life. We're different. Keyword, we're different. Whenever anybody says we're different, that means they're in a what? Silo. Which means that anything anybody else says has no impact, because they're different. I thought about this, and then when my oldest was 19 and my youngest was 4, I looked into my eyes of my oldest and I asked him, what do you want to do in life? And I saw nothing there. There was absolutely nothing there. No movement, nothing. And I realized, without even knowing it, I had copied how my parents had raised me, and I was managing, directing, and controlling my kids. Because I thought, even though I couldn't control my wife, I could control my kids. When looking into the eyes of my oldest child, I realized that I had made a terrible mistake. So I realized with 7 more coming behind him, I would have to make a change. And the change I made was drastic. I would have to even control and discipline myself. And the change was, we were going from a family that was managed, directed, and controlled to a family with absolutely no rules. Absolutely no rules. So I got all the kids together. I said, we're going to a new policy of no rules. And they're very interested in this. I said, Dad, explain more. What does no rules mean? Well, I said, number 1, you never have to ask for approval for anything you do. You can do anything you want to do. They said, really? How about if we don't want to do our chores? Thought about it. Then you don't do your chores. They said, who is going to do our chores if we don't do it? Thought about it. There's only one person left, that's me. I'm going to do your chores. I said, okay, good. Okay, and they said, how about the 4-year-old? Can he do whatever he wants to do? I said, that's fine. He can go to sleep when he wants to. He can eat when he wants to. If he doesn't want to eat, he doesn't have to eat. He can watch whatever he wants on television. He can go out and play with anybody he wants to play with. And of course, the question on their mind was, do we have to do our studies? Only if you want to. It's your choice. Now you might think that I'm totally crazy. But what happened here was something that we face in the supply chain all the time. Here's the buyer. And here's the expert vendor. What happens if the buyer keeps telling the expert vendor what to do? Like a parent telling their child what to do. Does the value of their expertise go up or down? Down. Do they use their expertise more or less?
Less.
Do they become more proactive or reactive?
Reactive.
Does the quality of their work go up or down? It goes down. So then this side sees the quality going down and somehow has the idea in their head, the reason why quality is going down is they don't understand. So I'm going to talk even what? Even more. And I'm going to make the documents even what? And I'm going to regulate them even tighter. And this is the condition that we were in the early 2000s when all the contractors were caught for collusion. Because they were so overly regulated, there was no room for, quote, profit to be made. And everybody was the same. The only thing that was different was price. They couldn't survive. So all the major contractors got together and decided that they would pre-decide every federal job. And they would identify who would get the job and everybody else would bid higher. And this led to collusion. Right? The only reason people collude is because people can't survive. They don't have enough freedom. They can't do what they're doing for their livelihood. Fear enters in, and they do the only thing they know how to do to survive. When somebody's trying to survive, do they become visionary or blind? They become blind. And no one believed it at first. But the source of all this was the owners who were doing this. All the owners didn't realize that they were doing the same thing that I did to my kids. They were doing this to the nth degree. And this all had to change. And the change of this is when this side stops doing that. Then what are these entities going to do? It's interesting. The first thing that happens is everybody comes out of their silo because there's no need to stay in there anymore. When they come out now, I as a parent had to talk more or talk less? Talk less. I had to change a major cultural tradition in our family. I had to make things simple, which means, is it a good thing when we make our kids think? How many think yes? Okay. If I make my kids think, are they more likely or less likely to understand what I'm saying and then go and do something about it? More likely?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, look. How many of you ever had the idea that when you talk to your kids, you would talk in like details, make sure they understood everything about what you were saying, right? And that the kids should listen to it. And then maybe we send them to their room to think about it, right? And in the room, a 5-year-old child comes to the realization, oh my goodness, what have I done? And then they're saying, oh my goodness, I put my parents through all that pain. Oh my goodness, what am I going to do about it? How am I ever going to recover? I am never going to do that again. And then come out and be a totally different person. Does that happen? Okay, look, let's look at another way of looking at this. When we want transparency, everybody agrees transparency is a good thing, right? Transparency is when everything is simple. When I release this bottle, everybody knows it's going to fall. You could be an engineer, you could be an architect, you could be a facility manager, you could be a lawyer. Everybody knows when I release this, it's going to fall. So everyone should know when I run 100 tests, and I release this 100 times, what % of the time is the bottle going to stay right there?
Zero.
Zero. Everybody knows that. Because you realize it's going to fall. Something that is simple is something that we understand. When it's simple, everybody can observe it, everybody knows what to do. They can see the future. When something is simple, which means we understand it, is there more need to think or less need to think? Less. Is there more decision making or less decision making? Less, because you know what's going to happen. Okay, now, when you're talking to your kids, do you want them to think more or think less? Do you want to make things simple so they can observe and act? Or do you want to make it complex so they have to go in the room and think about it for a couple hours? And after they think about it for a couple hours, they're going to come out of there, and what are they going to do about it? I propose you nothing. I'm proposing to you that the best way to communicate with our kids is to make it simple. The longer it takes for them to understand what's going on, the more they have to think about it, the probability of them doing something is going to go up or down. It's going to go down. To make somebody think is the worst thing that you can do. Look, this is a supply chain. Do we want to make the vendors think more or think less? Ah, it's too difficult, too complex an idea. Let's take it in our own organization. Is this a good thing when the boss does this? Is this a good thing when the workers float boss information to the boss? Good thing? How many of you think this is a good thing? Okay, now, when we do this to the boss, does the boss have to think more or think less? More, right? So it's a good thing to make our boss think more. Now, see, some people are already shaking their hands. No, not a good thing to make your boss think. Why? Because when you make your boss think, sooner or later, your boss is going to have to make a decision. And when they make a decision, their risk is going to go up or down. Up. So the only people who flow information and make their boss think are people who want to put their boss at risk so that you can get rid of him. The natural law is you never make your boss think and you never make them make decisions unless you want to get rid of them. The natural law is because you have no control or influence over any other party, and all the information is already there, the more you make people think, their stress level goes what? Their decision making goes up. Their risk goes what? People never realize it's not a good thing to try to make other people think. The only reason people try to make other people think is because they think they have the power of what? Control or influence over the other person. I'm proposing to you that's just not there. So we have to change our paradigm. That's what makes this best value idea so hard. What is best value? Best value is simply, which means the need to think about it goes what? Down. The need to make decisions goes what? Down. Who makes it simple? The expert. Does the expert talk more or talk less? They talk less. They make it simple. Because they actually realize, because they're an expert, that there are many non-experts around. And the only way an expert realizes they can communicate to somebody who doesn't know as much as them is by making it what? Simple. So whenever anybody starts getting complex, I stop them and say, you know, I'm totally lost. Can you make it simple? And if they can't make it simple, there is a natural law that tells me what? Are they an expert or are they a non-expert? They're non-experts, so they get technical, they get detailed, right? We know that because the way engineers, doctors, and all technical people get trained is by details. When we're trying to solve a problem, do we go toward the problem or do we go away from the problem? What do y'all think? If we go toward the problem, do we see more details or fewer details? More. When we get more details, does our stress level go up or down? Goes up. And as we see even more details, do we get more confused or more clear? More confused until we're down here doing this. And now when we're doing this, do we communicate with everybody else more clearly and more simply? Or do we look like we're some type of freak, talking a different language with a secret handshake? Yeah, no one can understand an engineer because they're into the details. No. What we must do, if we see a problem, is step away from the problem. Try to see patterns. Try to see what's going on. We quickly realize that when somebody does this to the other person, right, is this going to get the job done? What's the answer? No. Will this work in the family? No. Will this work with your spouse? No. Has anybody ever figured out, like if you're the father and a husband, because I'm a father and a husband, so I can't speak for wives. But for a father and a husband, has anybody realized that the more you talk, your risk goes up? Like, do you realize that when your spouse comes and says, honey, I want to have a conversation, that a conversation means that she talks? Right? Does this make sense? This is by observation. This is what I call simple. This is a natural law. So, does the wife want the husband to listen for 5 minutes and then quickly say, honey, this is simple. This is the answer. This is what you have to do. Just go and do it. Does the wife want to hear that? No. So the husband now, who has a lot of experience, realizes that what he must do is intently listen and pay attention. And he has very few words that he needs to say. Yes? Wow, that's a marvelous idea. How did you ever think of that? Oh my goodness, I couldn't have come up with that solution in a million years. Honey, I'm sorry, it'll never happen again. And with those few keywords, you now have a model husband. Isn't that true? That is true. Right? And if the wife ever wants the husband to give his knowledge and advice, she's going to actually ask him, you know, I'm totally lost on this. What do you think? What should I do? If she doesn't say those exact words, then we're back to a traditional conversation. This. Right? Because those are natural laws. That goes on in my house, that goes on in everybody else's house. Right? So when somebody tells me, that's how it goes on in my house, I mean, I talk and my husband's talk, but I talk. Look, when do we do more of this? Before we got married or 30 years later? How do you know you don't do this 30 years later? Because if you ever saw somebody who's been married for 30 years, and they're in a Christmas party, and they're in a corner, and going like this, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Do you want to get closer to this or farther away? It's not a good thing. When do we make more decisions about our spouse? Is it before we got married or is it 30 years later? When do we try to impact, influence, and control our spouse? Is it before we got married or is it 30 years later? Well, why were we doing all these things before we got married? It's simply because we didn't have enough information. So now, let's go to our practice. We want a win-win. We want efficiency. We want effectiveness. Do we want to copy how newlyweds act? Or how somebody with enough information, who has observed reality, who uses natural laws? Right. So do we want to talk more or talk less as owners? Less. Do we want to make things more simple or more complex? Do we want to make people think more or think less? Okay, so we're in a pre-bid meeting. We've got all the vendors in. We tell all the vendors, we don't exactly know what we want because we're not the expert. This is what we think we want. And some vendor in the audience says, yes. And the vendor says, you haven't given me enough information. There's no way I can come up with a solution with that little information. Plus, I don't have enough time to think about this. You need to give me more time. What should we tell the vendor? Yeah, I tell the vendor, you know, maybe this is not the exact right job for you. And everybody laughs. But normally what do? We want to do how much of this as we try to get our proposals in? A lot. Any question we want to answer. Then we want to make sure everybody else has the answer. Right? We want to give as much information out as possible. That just won't work. Right? Because the people get all this information, they still won't be able to process it. Not only that, it makes it seem as if the only difference now will be what? Price. And that is the traditional low bid system. So what is best value? Simple. Minimize this. Utilize expertise. If the owner or a user or a boss is doing this, how much expertise can they utilize? None. They're too busy what? Talking. Those are natural laws. They're very simple. I found out the same thing with my kids. Everyone's happy. They're getting married, having kids. When things are explained simple, you'd be amazed at how much better they do. Then we find out there are no silos in life. The natural laws, they work everywhere. There are no silos. We don't act one way at home and another way on the job. Another way in social life and another way on the job. You can't do that. It's the same silo, but people are blind to create silos. So it's a change of paradigm. How many of you think you can just sit there and relax? How many of you are relaxed now? When we talk to our children, should we listen first before we talk, or should we talk first? Logic tells you to listen, right? So you know what's on their mind. When we bring the expert vendors in, should we talk first or listen first? Listen first. Every principle in best value uses logic and common sense. And then people say, well, that's different. I need to get permission. And I always tell them, which one of you needs permission from your boss to use common sense in your job? Or put it another way, how many times do you need to hear common sense before you actually try to do it? And if somebody gets like really confused by that question, the best thing to do is what? Walk away. Because that person will never understand. It is getting simple. Best value is using simplicity. We've been doing it for a long time. Over 20 years with outstanding results. Now, if we had two individuals, and one person was a 60-year-old man, and the other person was a 22-year-old college graduate, and they had to pick, either proposing that they knew nothing, or that they know everything, the 60-year-old person would gravitate to which side? Knowing everything or knowing nothing? It's knowing nothing. Because the older we get, the more we realize how little we know about everything. And if we would just pay attention in grade school when we heard the story of Socrates, that would make tremendous value in our life. Every event, everything that we see that takes time, starts off with unique initial conditions and ends up with unique final conditions. There is no way to get around this. When we get to the end, we always see that the unique final conditions are connected to the unique initial conditions. There is no way to control, impact, influence the event or anybody in the event to get a set of conditions that are not related to the initial conditions. The cost just goes what? The stress level of everybody goes, but we end up getting the same thing. So, we need a way to minimize the confusion. Because only in confusion do people make decisions. We need to get rid of decisions. How do we do that? By making it simple. How do you make something simple? Let's go back to marriage. This is what they teach newlyweds. This will never work. Why? Because I guarantee you that the young man and the young woman don't know very much. So they're both going to be making what? Decisions. And then one party is going to try to do what to the other party? Control. So you're going to make decisions, then control. This is going to lead to flare-ups, misunderstandings, stress goes up, tempers go up. This will never survive. So, what is the best value solution? This took me 15 years to figure out. So simple. We have to get rid of what? Decision making. People only make decisions when it's not simple. Have to get rid of confusion. So how do you get rid of confusion? I, as a father, the only way I could do it is to admit to myself that anything that went wrong in the family was my fault. No questions asked. My wife burned the dinner, it's my fault. My wife fell down the stairs, it's my fault. Right? Why did she burn the dinner? Because she had too much on her mind. Why did she have too much on her mind? Because I expected too much out of her. Why did she fall on the stairs? Because there wasn't enough lighting. She was tired. She had too much to do. Everything sooner or later comes back to me, it was my fault. And I realized, in order to eliminate all confusion and all decision making, if I flat out said anything that goes wrong is my fault, the stress level of my spouse is going to go up or down? Down. Her time to think about things will go up or down? Oh. How many of the wives would love it if your husband never said a derogatory thing about you, never blamed you for anything, always was trying to explain why it wasn't your fault, and treated you like a queen? What wife would not like this? We all love it, right? I even had young men saying they would become wives if the wives would take the other role. Right? I mean, under these conditions, if the husband just admitted everything was his fault, then his wife would have more time. If she had a problem, she would try to solve the problem on her own. Would she support her husband more or less? More. And that's all the husbands wanted from the very beginning. They just didn't realize how to minimize the confusion. And it was, the husband takes all the blame. Very simple. And for those husbands who are old enough, you realize if you don't do this, it's your fault anyway. So you don't have a choice. This is a natural law. For you younger people, if you learn this, this is worth far more than applying this at best value. It's applying natural laws in your own personal life. Making things simple. Now, I'm going to flip ahead because I don't have a lot of time. And I'm going to show you, this is a good one. You think you can explain something to somebody? Yeah. Yeah. You know, I don't like tattoos, but this guy's not going to be happy. Right? And he showed her the picture on top of that. No, that won't work. Okay. I'm going to skip these case studies. I'm going to go to something that I think has even more impact than all the proof of how much best value can save you. I'm going to go to this. See, we finally realized that when the soldiers put on the night vision goggles, their thinking doesn't change, but they can see farther. When they put the autopilot systems into the cockpit, it minimized the need for the pilots to do every unique condition at every unique airport. They were simplifying things so that things would become clear. So we're thinking, let's go into the classroom. Let's try this out. So in the classroom, the first thing we have to do is lower the stress level of kids. Does everybody agree if the stress level goes down, kids learn better and more and faster? So this is what we told them. You come to class and you listen to very simple concepts. Then, whatever conclusion you come up with, that is always the right conclusion. So the kids can never be wrong. Stress level goes down. The kids learn 5 times as quick. And we see them now doing things that are simply mind-boggling. We have kids coming in who are depressed or who are like subject to alcoholism or on some type of drugs or just overall totally stressed with their lives. And in 1 or 2 or 3 semesters, they totally change. And their parents come back and say, my goodness, how did you make that happen? Or I actually have one of the kids, fellow students, actually come and ask me, what happened to this student? Why did they have such a drastic change? And I simply told them, lower the stress level. Let them think on their own. Don't try to control or influence them. Just expose them to simplicity. Now, why am I telling you this? Because not only does Best Value find the most expert vendor, but Best Value actually helps every vendor become better than they actually are, without any impact, influence, or control. Now, one thing that adds to the simplicity of this is what we call the language of metrics. How many bottles am I holding in my hand? How long is that conversation? Metrics does what to this? Minimizes it. We minimize the communication using the language of metrics. Experts do more or do less of this? Less. So now what's going to happen is we're going to teach the experts this. Experts are going to use the language of metrics. They're going to simplify everything so the buyers and the users will immediately know if they're experts or not. And even if they're not experts, they are going to do much better, see much farther than they could possibly see before. Simply by running this simplistic, decision-less structure of Best Value. And to understand what the language of metrics is, I'm going to have my son Isaac stand up and run you through what this actually is. Okay, are we ready?
Now, I am the product of best value. I am the second youngest in the family. I was 7 years old when it was implemented. And if you come after the presentations to talk with me, I'll explain to you what exactly no rules means. It's actually very interesting. But can we pop up the other presentation? Here we go. This is the use of metrics, the language of metrics. So I speak English, I learned Portuguese in Brazil, and this is the third language I learned, and hopefully we'll teach it to you all today. The use of metrics. Now, it is not confused with the traditional KPIs. Now, traditional KPIs are usually made by, they're standardized for one, and they're made by the people managing the people that do the work. So they're not even made by the people doing the work. It's used by management as a way to control the people doing the work. This is not the correct form of metrics. The language of metrics is the simplest, most dominant way to communicate an idea. Metrics isn't just a way to show performance. Metrics is a way to communicate with somebody else clearly, quickly, and simply. And it's the way that experts talk to non-experts. Now, experts have to assume that everybody they talk to is a non-expert. If they begin to think that everybody knows exactly what they know, they'll never be understood. And that's why experts will always speak clearly in terms of metrics. Because metrics, they're non-biased. They require no technical expertise to understand what a metric is. A 1 is a 1, a 2 is a 2. Everyone can clearly understand what a metric is, what a number is. They're used as information to predict the future. Now, the only reason we need information is to help us to predict what will happen in the future. Any information that does not help us to predict performance in the future is useless information. It's just there. And we'll run through some examples now. So if you're an expert and you want to show a non-expert that you are an expert, this is how they need to communicate. This is a traditional way they try to communicate. They say things like they're experienced, they delivered many large projects, they've had high customer satisfaction. Now this may appear okay, but imagine reading 50 pages of this. Your mind will go crazy. Because you see things like this, experienced, many large, complex. What do these words even mean? How does this help you know if that vendor is an expert, if they can actually do high performance? And then the next person comes behind them and they say the exact same thing, but they put very in front of everything. Very high customer satisfaction, extremely high satisfaction. They begin to do other things. They begin to say, use metrics maybe, but they use it the wrong way. They say, I've been doing this for 20 years maybe. I have this certificate. But again, this does not really help me to know if they will give me high performance. It's just information. Then, they get the best they can, they give you a metric. They say, our customer case fill on time was decreased or increased our last job by 10%. So that sounds okay, but if you're a non-expert, technical metrics are useless to you. I have no idea whether this is good, whether this is bad, or whether this will actually help my performance in the future. So all of this is not a good way to go. Failing to speak in terms of metrics. Experts don't understand this, but when you don't speak in terms of metrics, your marketing can be duplicated. Anybody can say what you have said. It provides no differential, which means when there's no differential, it will always get down to sales teams, relationships, and price. And the use of, or your performance means very little to the clients. This is how experts should be speaking. Instead of saying we have a PM, they say he's experienced with large projects, but this is what that means. He's done 20 projects. This is the average budget. This is the largest budget he's done. Instead of high performing, they say he's had 9.8 satisfaction out of 10. That's the deviation on his projects. This is what high performing is. This is what we think a complex IT project would be. It involves this many interfaces, this many transactions, this many departments. Now, these type of metrics cannot be duplicated. The only way they can be duplicated is if somebody actually has the expertise that you have. They do it with risk as well. This is a traditional risk format. They say, we have a critical risk in IT projects. There's a possibility that this could happen. It could have an enormous delay to the project. So immediately, oh, this is important. It's enormous. So let's go to the solution. They'll say, we do everything possible. We'll do it as soon as possible. They say, we have a very successful company risk methodology, and it's a refined integration process used in all projects. So this sounds really good again. But it has the same problem. What does critical mean? How do I know this is critical? How critical? How enormous is enormous? How soon is soon? And when you get into the project, this becomes a very big problem. What do these words mean? Instead of saying these words, experts will say, I think this is critical because on this amount of percent of projects I've done in the past, it's been a problem. Instead of saying it's an enormous risk, they'll say it usually takes 6 weeks on average for the market to fix it. Now I know how important this is. The solution, as soon as possible, is not a good way to address a risk. In the past 20 projects I implemented this, we have found out 50% sooner than usual. Successful. We've done it on 8 projects that actually had the problem, and sometimes it's between 0 to 1 weeks that we can actually solve your problem. The only person, the expert now, if they give this to the owner can't give this expertise out to anybody. They can't take this risk and give it to everybody. Because the only person that can duplicate this kind of thing is the expert. Relevant and specific. We'll go over this really quickly. Vendors aren't the one that begin with metrics. It's the client as well. When the client relays what they want, they have to speak in terms of metrics as well. They can't use words like complex or critical. They need to define actually what they want. They need to define in terms of metrics what they want delivered. Now this is important because when it gets to the vendors now, you have a vendor that has nothing, a vendor that has metrics on their company. The vendor that shows metrics on their company, you probably want them above somebody that has nothing. Another vendor comes in and says, not just our company, but this PM that we'll put on the job, he has these metrics. This is even better now, to say, I know now the person I get from the company will be good. But to make it even better, vendor 4, they'll say, I have this PM, and he will match what the PM has done in the past to the metrics of the client. Saying, I know my PM can do your job because he's done jobs exactly like your job. And there's no doubt now in the owner's mind that this PM in this company can complete my job. Okay. Well, this will be the last one. We have a problem in our family. We need a phone plan. Everybody needs a phone plan. We have 5 people who need a phone plan, and it's my job to pick the phone plan. The problem, though, is these phone plans are confusing. You go on each site, they have new deals, new packages. It's hard to compare which is which. And I have all these family members that see these ads, mostly my mother, and she always thinks we're getting the worst deal. She always comes to me, did you see that commercial? Did you check that company? Are you sure this is the best thing we could have got? So I needed a way to quickly show everybody that we have the best deal, and this is the way we should go. And I needed a way, most times experts, they bring options to the client. They say, these are 3 very good options we have. We know you have your own preferences, so we think you should choose. This is not good. The client is not the expert. The expert should be able to see what the client needs and provide the option that best fits the client. They shouldn't provide option to increase decision-making on the client side. This was the same for our family. So this is what I did. I looked up the top 5 companies, and I saw what my family needed, data-wise, minutes-wise. And I compared it only to what I knew we needed. And I compared them side by side. I identified T-Mobile is recommended because it's the cheapest, it satisfies all our needs, and the only downside of T-Mobile is they have a low coverage score. And so they have a low coverage score. To get a higher coverage score, it costs $600 more. The only thing is, our family travels a lot internationally and in-state, and we've never had a problem with coverage. So to pay $600 more to fix a problem that we don't even have is no decision. And so quickly now, everyone, even my mother, can see T-Mobile is the best option. If they want a different one, it either costs more money and it wouldn't do us any good. This is how experts need to bring options up. Use metrics to communicate which way the client should go. And let's get this. In conclusion, though, metrics is the way we communicate. It's the way you should do everything. The client and the vendor. It's the way both parties should communicate. It's the way to simplify things. It's the way that expertise can actually be utilized. So a non-expert can finally understand what an expert is trying to tell them without having to know everything the expert knows. And now, hopefully all of you know one additional language for today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.